The thing that's been great with this group and why it gives me great encouragement moving forward is you wouldn't know what our record is watching practice. They show up and they work, and then they're intentional about their work. There's no one hanging their head or feeling sorry for themselves. They go out there and work. And so that has made it much more enjoyable and easier to navigate through this time because of the way they show up.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. Week 12 in the books. Can't wait to dive into that. Of course, always joined by the co-founder of Y Option, Jim Thornby. Jim, excited to see you. We have an interesting day today. We got a big week this week. Got rivalry games like USC, UCLA. Budding rivalry game, Washington State, Oregon State. Today, we're going to have Trent Bray on the podcast, the head coach of Oregon State. I love how he's just going to navigate this, and they can't wait to learn how he's navigating a tough stretch, injuries, multiple quarterbacks, a tough loss over the weekend, but appreciate him and the time to make for our show. We got award winners as well, man. So before we get to all that, how you living today, brother?
Good. We're back on the mostly healthy train here at this point. So let's just roll through the end of the regular season here. We got 2 more weekends of regular season play, and then we got the championship, then we got the Heisman, then the playoffs start. So let's roll. Let's do this.
Okay. I love that for you. I'm like, I can't wait for a weekend. And we're like, no, we're going to go to New York. We're going to go to the champ games. We are not slowing down here at Y Option. So Jim Thornby, thank you for driving this. I don't know what we are, for a Ferrari, if we're a boat, if we're every day, it might change.
That's but right there.
Totally. All right. One thing that did change, at least for me, I was in the studio in Chicago this week at the Big Ten Network's headquarters in Chicago alongside Ashley Adamson and company. That was an absolute blast. I think it's kind of this unique blessing, at least for me, Jim. I get to kind of be like you on a Saturday where you get to watch all the games. We're jumping in and doing halftimes and post-game shows, etc. But you really get to lock in. And it's fun to hear other announcers. As an announcer, I very rarely will go back and listen to the audio. So what's Todd Blackledge think, right? How does Gary Danielson navigate a tricky end of the game, USC, Nebraska? It looked like PI to me. Clearly wasn't called that. And just also have some fun with some of your colleagues. So it was a different weekend in that regard, but I enjoyed it because I get to watch all the games in real time and also got to watch some unique performances. So let's get to those performances. Our Go, Go, Go awards, always with our founding partner, 76. We created this in the offseason. Here we are, week 12. So you know the deal. From the thrill of victory to the sting. I know there was some sting, UCLA. I know some sting in that defeat. We've got incredible spirit. We got sideline grit. We got coaches making decisions. We have players thriving. We got young players like Damon Williams. He threw his name in the ring for a 5-star QB as a true freshman at UW. But bottom line, we partnered with 76 to create the Go, Go, Go awards, celebrating players, plays, and coaches who just go above and beyond. And in this stage of the season, you got to keep going. So, Jim, where do we net out this weekend?
Yeah, obviously with where this show is and where we came from, most of the time a former Pac-12 player is going to win these awards, or coach is going to win these awards. Ashton Shetty has obviously been the outlier for most of the season as he's taken home a bunch of these. But it's kind of cool to be able to show a spotlight on guys outside as well. And unfortunately, it was at the mercy of the Washington State Cougars. But Devin Dampier, and honestly, I think whoever won this game was going to win this award because John Mateer had an absolutely phenomenal game as well. But Devin Dampier, the quarterback from New Mexico, we got to see him a little bit earlier in the season when they played Arizona, and he had a terrific game of there. And people were like, wait, who's this guy? He showed again that he can play against big-time competition. 193 rushing yards, 3 rush TDs, including the game winner, another 174 passing yards, and 1 pass TD. He's a sophomore out of Scottsdale, obviously very under-recruited, But this year, as a sophomore, over 2,500 pass yards, over 1,000 rushing yards. He's only one of 13 quarterbacks in the FBS since 2014 to have done that. Some other guys who've done that, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray, all those dudes won Heisman. So credit to Devin Dampier, man. That dude is going places. Speaking of going places, a true freshman at Stanford. Been a rough year for the Cardinal, obviously, but man, did Emmett Mosley really show out in a huge upset over Louisville. 13 receptions, 168 yards, 3 touchdowns. Both the receptions and touchdowns, both the freshman record for Stanford. Just an awesome job for him. And a kid that I went to the spring game this year, and like they were talking about like him being like, oh, he can be a big guy. Started the season not hurt, but he's been slowly building to this moment, and then boom. Someone who has not been slowly building, Travis Hunter. I mean, it's funny because last week when we had Andy Staples on, and we talked about how, you know, statistics might not always paint the picture of Travis Hunter. If there's a game where he doesn't, you know, he might not have any defensive stats, that doesn't mean he didn't have a good game. He actually probably had one of his best games if he doesn't have any defensive stats. That means they ain't going near him. This one was a game where I like to say highlights are for Heisman's. Like, no one is watching every single snap of every single game. You know, moments are popping out here and there. And as far as making moments, this was one of the biggest games of Travis Hunter's season. He had the great catch where he leaped up at the 10-yard line and, you know, high pointed over 2 Utah defenders. He had the interception off the deflection. He had his first career rushing touchdown, which, I mean, that play was just showing off Travis Hunter's athleticism like no end. Was it statistically, like if you actually really dig into it, like it probably wasn't his best game as a defender. It was the first time he actually gave up a touchdown all year as a DB, Dorian Singer. But as far as like just in the volume of information that Heisman voters are trying to consume, they're seeing those 3 plays. I mean, and like all the talk on Saturday was Travis Hunter is now the surefire Heisman leader. And if you don't think that, you're done. Like that was like basically the sentiment around college football on Saturday. And lastly, sticking in the Big 12, the other former Pac-12 team that is really killing it in the Big 12 this year, Kenny Dillingham. Sun Devils are 8-2 for the first time since 2013. They gave Kansas State their first home loss. They were up 24-0 in that game. Held on. Kenny had some creative clock management in that game with knowing how to run the clock down, maybe delay a game here or there. He kind of played it pretty coy in his weekly press conference on that, but it's, you know, a credit to him. And it's funny. So looking at, you know, at these winners and just kind of putting this all in a bow here, there's a chance that for the Big 10 and Big 12 championship games, 3 of those 4 teams will be former Pac-12 teams. I mean, just show you what the insanity of this college football season is this year.
Yeah, just like we all predicted.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot to take from that. I'll be brief because I know we have some stuff to review. One, I am a fan, and we've said this many times, and we give out a newsletter every week about 5-star advice from a 5-star quarterback or somebody in that space, whether it's a coach or an actual player from the book I co-wrote with Joey Roberts called 5-Star QB. I say all that of like, I am a fan in this world of recruiting, going and playing somewhere or going and truly going to a place where you can develop. So here we go. We got a weekend where USC's top quarterback commit decommits, SC gets another quarterback who's a Elite 11 guy. Like, you're seeing the shuffle. And then I can't help but think of Devin Dampier and think, all right, dude is balled out. He's played. Now where is he going to go command the best opportunity for himself? He's going to have to decide what opportunity means. Does that mean biggest payday, biggest stage, biggest conference, best quarterback developer, best offense? Like, I don't know him at all. Like, he'll have to figure that out. But the opportunity is there versus players that haven't played yet and are sitting there as second-year, third-year players in college and then have to figure out where do they want to go next for their quote-unquote opportunity. So keep, obviously, your eye on that. We'll be all over the transfer portal, especially at quarterback, once that thing kicks off. Sadly, that thing does kick off, but that is part of life right now. And I also think Kenny Dillingham. I get what Coach Prime has done at Colorado, and I think doing what he has done in the face of so much negativity around him is really impressive. I want to give all that credit. But I want to say that for Kenny Dillingham, to me, in the Big 12, because Curt Cignetti is going to win the Big 10 and the National Coach of the Year awards. It's already a lock. He should. I mean, he took a program that's never been high to places they've never been as they head into the horseshoe this weekend against Ohio State. Kenny Dillingham's team picked last. Kenny Dillingham had to do exactly what Colorado did in terms of complete rebuild of the roster. But he was the youngest coach in the country. He didn't have any Super Bowls. He didn't have a Hall of Fame career. He had no pedigree comparable to a cultural icon in Deion Sanders. I just say that of like, it has been a masterful job. In addition, Cam Scatterbo is an elite player, but he's not going to be picked in the first 10 picks of the draft this coming spring. And I think Colorado's going to have two guys in Shedeur Sanders and the aforementioned Travis Hunter. So I'm giving today my vote for Coach of the Year to Kenny Dillingham in the Big 12. Got 2 weeks left. Hopefully those two teams face off in the Big 12 title, and we can celebrate all of them. And I'm a fan. You don't have to always just pick one or the other. That's the world we're in. Both have done a phenomenal job, but I feel like no one is giving Kenny Dillingham his proper credit. And I want to make sure that happens. We've had him on a few times on this show. We had him on a couple weeks ago. The plan, the development, bringing in Marcus Arroyo, bringing in Sam Levitt, losing Jaden Rashada. I mean, come on, man. That's really impressive. They got to a bowl. We would have said that's the ceiling. Now their ceiling potentially is a CFP game. Well, what are we talking about? I mean, that will be awesome. And can you imagine if Oregon loses in the Big Ten title game, a CFP game, Arizona State in Eugene? Like, somebody fly Bo Nix in on a private plane just to do a segment from the booth, like just because.
Or the ghost of Taylor Kelly. I mean, Taylor Kelly, that's the one that I think about of, what was that, 2019 probably of ASU knocking Oregon out of the playoff conversation back then. So
and I guess that couldn't happen anyway. That would, because they'd have to win and be the Big 12 champ, so they'd get a bye. But maybe they play in the Rose Bowl,
or not if they're behind Boise. I mean, there's still a lot of machinations here.
All right.
Let's not close the door on anything at this point of the season. A lot of people are closing doors that should not yet be closed. So
I love it. Well, Jim, I don't want to open this door, but I thought about you on Saturday night because we're doing what everybody does at this point in the season. What happens if? What are the tie-break scenarios? And it's kind of hairy, right? In the Big Ten, we've got an Oregon team who is a bye this coming week, and then they face Washington at home. I think we would all think that Oregon will win that game. Then go to the Big Ten title game. Who knows who they will face? That will be figured out this weekend. And then who knows what will happen after that potentially. But there may be a 4-way tie for the top of the Big Ten. We don't need to get into that. We'll have a ton of time to get into that if that is the case here in a couple weeks. But Oregon survives Wisconsin. I want to know your thoughts because we wrote about this in our newsletter on Sunday at yoption.com if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, I know, I'm sure it's interesting for you too, because probably this was the most you've watched Oregon in real time. Not just going back and, watching the cut-ups after the fact, other than the game that you did, earlier in the season. But it's funny because even I was definitely critical of their decision to go for it with the fake field goal, and not necessarily of the decision. Like, because we talked about it with the Ohio State game. Like, if you make 5, I don't want to call them crazy, but, really super aggressive calls, and 3 of them work out and 2 of them don't, that's probably still a huge positive in your column. And that's the way that they've played. So it's tough to take each one in a vacuum and go, oh, that was a dumb decision, whatever like that. Because, I mean, obviously it worked out for them. The only thing I would have, in my mind, would have done if they were truly going for it was let their Heisman contender make the play. Trust in Dylan. I mean, not that they don't trust Dylan Gabriel. Obviously, they trust Dylan Gabriel. But I would rather have Dylan Gabriel trying to get those yards than someone on special teams trying to. I think it was Aiden Schneider was the one that actually ran the ball on that play. But that's my only critique at all. And not that it matters because Dan's going to do what Dan's going to do and he's going to be successful doing it. But that's kind of where I netted out with that decision and what was a tough game.
Ready, set. Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that agreed with you. I just got off the set of Big Ten Network on Monday morning. We do a show every Monday, and people thought the same thing. Don't mind going for it, but give it to Terrence Ferguson, give it to Jordan James, let Dillon Gabriel make a play. And I think it's a super fair argument. Here's where I net out on that. And we wrote about it again at yoption.com. Check it out. I love the idea of going for it. Just like I love the idea of coming out of the third quarter as they are playing jump around, and it is an absolute frenzy in that stadium. And as the camera pans to the Oregon sideline, if you can freeze frame a little bit, you see Dan Lanning smirking. You see Dillon Gabriel steely-eyed. They talked about it all week. After the game, they referenced in practice, that song was bumping all week. That's nothing new to coaching. Every team does that, whether it's the USC fight song, whether it's jump around, whether it's moment of loudness at Utah. Like, you're trying to prepare your team for the competitive arena, which is Saturday night, wherever you may be playing. So they're getting ready for Camp Randall. And what I loved is they come out of the break on a fourth down and manageable, but it wasn't like 4th and inches, and they go for it. And they do what you referenced, Jim. They put the ball in Dillon Gabriel's hand. They find a tight window, the only window, Heisman-esque throw to me, which is what I think Dillon Gabriel has done all season. For those that are like, you want a moment, how about being undefeated? Right? They'll give you that moment compared to when you lose. It's just a different type of way you take the field, in my humble opinion. To that point, go to the next opportunity on a fourth down. Why did I love it? I love it because it reminded me of Pete Carroll. And I'm not going to say it, but if you go to YouTube, the student section, every time it's a fourth down, they go like this. And you can figure out what that means if you're watching this on YouTube. And the idea is like, Pete's going to say, I believe we can go for this.
Think Sam Cassell's old NBA celebration when he would run back up the court.
Yeah. For those more taste than that.
For those who aren't watching and just listening and need a visual idea of what that was.
Right, and they would chant that in the game. And so much like Pete would smirk too, but he would never do it because the fans wanted him to do it. Dan Lanning didn't do it because every pundit says Dan Lanning, since he became a head coach, has gone for it, whether it's going for it instead of kicking a field goal multiple times in the Washington rivalry, or et cetera, in a variety of games like the Ohio State game we saw earlier this season and the onside surprise onsides. Like, no, this is just who not only he is, but way more importantly, who he knows his team to be. So I will say it again. The DNA traits for the Oregon Ducks are connection, growth, toughness, and sacrifice. And if you don't believe that your team can handle the inverse of when this doesn't go well, then you don't do it. And he knows how connected this team is. He knew there was a chance that they weren't going to make it on that fake field goal. He also knew there was a chance to end the game. He also knew that they were, on the other side, they struggled offensively is probably the best way to say it. They were, 1 of 13 on third down. Wisconsin fired their offensive coordinator after the game. Like, he knew that Wisconsin wasn't going to move the ball. So he said, let's go end the game in a way where we have the numbers. You go back and watch it. They had the numbers, right? Like, I don't have a problem with the call. I understand why people would say what you said, Jim, and it's very fair. But ultimately, why does Dan Lanning continue to make these types of decisions? Because he believes that his teams can handle if they don't go well. And that, to me, is why you go do it. And, of course, you believe in your guys. You can make those plays. But I had so many flashbacks to the early 2000s of us going for it on seemingly every fourth down, backed up own territory. Here we go, Pete Carroll. Like, it's the same deal, I think, for the Oregon Ducks. So I'm a fan of that. I've been a fan of this team. Lastly, for them, because they're off next week, we probably won't touch upon them a ton. To be undefeated is so hard. There's 3 teams, right, that are still undefeated in the country. Indiana's one of them. Was it Army, right? The other one?
Yeah.
Army. All right, and here comes Oregon. Nobody in the country had an expectation among those 3 other than Oregon coming into the season. Nobody. Dillon Gabriel was an odds-on favorite to win the Heisman. Dan Lanning and company, everybody wanted to be a piece of that program because they knew what they were capable of doing and the run they went on, and they have gone on it. In, I believe, one of the more challenging schedules. They've had to go to Ann Arbor. They've had to go to Camp Randall. They had Ohio State, granted it was home, but nobody gave them, hey, just roll out the schedule and you've got, call it Indiana's if you want. They didn't have that. They didn't have Penn State's schedule. Like, they have had a brutal run to a large degree. Big props there, Mateo Ungolele. Big props for you. You were up for that dude again, man. You didn't get it, but you had a hell of a game, man. So impressive in that regard. Dylan Gabriel will be going to New York for the Heisman. Count on seeing you there, man. Count on seeing you there. All right.
And to that point of what you're talking about, like with their schedule, I mean, they just went 8 straight weeks without their last bye. I mean, because of the way the schedule lined up, they had a bye week after the Oregon State game before UCLA, so before the start of conference season. So they just went 8 straight conference games. I mean, that's impressive. And everybody's losing. Has injuries. They lost Tez. Jordan Burch didn't play in this game. Not making excuses for them, but you got to think like they are really hitting this bye week now at a great time. Not a great time for UW, I'll tell you that much. For Oregon to be on the bye week, because I think they're gonna be coming in to that game, I think, ready to rock. It should be a wild, fun rivalry game.
Yeah, and they haven't beaten them in Dan Lanning's era, right? In tenure, they haven't beaten UW. So, yeah, they will be mission-minded.
Although Bo Nix did beat Michael Penix on Sunday. So
there you go. We'll take that. We pride ourselves on being really thoughtful. This is college football through the lens of the West Coast. So I say this with tremendous thoughtfulness. I wonder, Jim, would you rather have a bye or play Mercer? Would you rather have a bye and play Murray State or UTEP or Wofford and La Tech and Louisiana Monroe? Like, what are we doing in the SEC? I am over. I do not want to hear how strong that conference is at this point of the season, and I don't want to hear for these next 2 weeks. What I do want to hear from the committee, I want to hear you penalize a team for playing 8 conference games when you're in the Super League. I get you want more money for another game on TV, and that is fair, and that is your business, and that is part of the business of college athletics. But if we get so tight to call it what it is, these 2 Super Leagues, the Big Ten and the SEC, and the SEC is pushing 6 teams that have 2 losses, and I understand why you would, but we have to, College Football Playoff Committee, we have to not be ignorant to the fact of playing 8 straight conference games, to your point, or playing legit conference games to the point of Ohio State and undefeated Indiana, or going to Minnesota and your Penn State this weekend, compared to this sorry schedule against these teams. I don't think it's safe for the game. Just give them the check and take the bye week if that's what you want to do. I don't think it's the right thing for the game. I don't think it has anything to do with the equity around the game with where the game stands today. 5 conference leagues, I can stomach it and light it up and have no problem taking my shots at the SEC, or when there's 5 Power 5 leagues. Now with only 4, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed, and I have no problem lighting it up and just being thoughtful and honest around it, because I think it's deserving of that. What are we talking about? What the hell are we talking about?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously Kirby was talking about that after the Tennessee game, and then I also was watching Game Day, and Nick Saban was talking about like Georgia's strength of schedule and how, that needs, if they were going to have lost to Tennessee, which obviously they didn't, and that keeps them right in the hunt for a spot here, but if they had lost, how Georgia's strength of schedule should be. Something that, why bother playing a strong schedule if whatever. And true, that is 100% correct. Now, they will have played in non-conference. They played Clemson to start the season. Fair. They're gonna play Georgia Tech to end the season. Those are two solid non-conference games. You can't say anything bad about that. I forget who the other Georgia team, but regardless, I mean, you have all these SEC teams, and as great as they are, most of them are not playing each other because you're only playing 8 conference games. Like, let's see that survival of the fittest. Then we'll really talk about strength of schedule, because then you can still play your Mercer or whoever whenever you want. And it's not like these other conferences are not playing a either FCS opponent or lower rung group of 5 team early in the season. But if you're playing 2 of those throughout the season, that's where it starts to get to be a little bit like, all right, come on. Like, you can't talk about strength of schedule just because you're playing, other teams in your conference that, has then sort of inflated that strength of schedule because they're all winning those games against the easier opponents.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair point, because of the teams that are ranked high, other than maybe A&M and the SEC, we all knew they would be good, right? Nobody knew Indiana would be good, right? So you're looking at the Ohio State Indiana game. You're saying, oh, maybe they have like a lesser conference game in advance of their big game, right, against their rival in Michigan. And now those teams are flipped, right? You got the better team here in week 13 and the worst one in the final week of the season. So I don't know. Like I think it's just it needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
It just needs to be addressed, man, because it's not the 12 best rosters. It's just not. It's just not. It's the season. You play for a reason. Like you just play for a reason. And maybe I'm old school in that regard, but I'm into head to head. If you lose, you don't go. You don't just, they get to play him again. It's like the Alabama LSU thing from years ago. Like you don't play him again, right? I mean, I just, that's why the version of the playoff that I really loved most never existed, which was if there were 5 power conferences, every champion from that conference got in. And you just gave your best. You want to play 5 conference games, 8, 9, 10, I don't give a damn. Like whatever your best can offer as a conference, send them to the dance. Because the variance of style of play, I think, is noticeable in terms of how all these leagues play. We don't have that. Now we have 12. So, yeah, you can get in that large. But you don't just get in because you got a really good roster and a lot of hype, and you finally played well against Tennessee, and your quarterback made dimes. I mean, the way that he played for Oregon was so impressive in Carson Beck. I mean, it was his best game of his entire season. But you got to look at the whole season. You just do. You just do. Okay.
Yeah, results matter. I mean, that's all. I mean, there's no question, and I don't think anybody's like. If you said, "Is Georgia one of the top 10 teams in the country?"
Of course,
performance-wise, yeah. I mean, thankfully for them winning this Tennessee game, you can say now, resume-wise, they deserve to be where they're going to be too. But if they lost that game, they should be out. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't care. Like, I don't care that they're better than X, Y, and Z. They didn't win the games. Now, granted, when you look at Indiana, you look at Penn State, and people go, "Oh, who'd they play?" They played the teams that were on their schedule. I mean, it's not their fault that Michigan fell off the cliff this year. You schedule these teams, and you have no idea what these other teams are gonna be. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's just a worthwhile discussion, right? And that's the whole point of this is like, that's why we started the show, right? And I can't wait to get to our discussion here in a minute. Before we do, with the head coach of Oregon State, Trent Bray, presented by our founding partner, 76, let's give some props to Arizona, your school, and Brennan. I mean, we had the poll on social media, like who needs to win more, SC or Arizona? SC gets the win. Amazing win. Congratulations to the Trojans, Lincoln Riley. All smiles in the post game. They got a big one. We'll preview later in the week, the USC UCLA matchup this coming Saturday night. But for Arizona, it was a Friday night game. Friday night games kind of get forgotten to a certain degree. Thankfully, this one will be remembered because they got a victory. T-Mac goes off. What is the vibe around Arizona right now as they head into the next weekend?
Well, it's depending on who you're asking the vibe. Is the vibe around the team or the vibe around the fans? Because they're in like polar opposite directions, at least from what you see on like social media. Like, sorry, I keep saying but so they're, that game happened at the same time that the Arizona, or not the same time, but they were both Friday night. Was the Arizona men's basketball team playing at Wisconsin, which was obviously a big game, not the result that any Arizona fan wanted there. So they played that game on the big board, before the game, doing their best to, accommodate fans who want to, be able to do it all. It didn't look like the crowd was much. I mean, it seems like there's at least a part of the fan base that is like actively rooting against the team so that they can like replace Brent. I mean, I get it. I'm definitely disappointed by this season as well, but I don't understand how this is constructive. Now, maybe you look at like what Colorado has done with Deion, what Arizona State has done with Kenny Dillingham, what Indiana has done with Signetti, and you look at and you go, oh, well, if we just do this, whatever. Like, I think that might be some unrealistic expectations of what new coaches can do. I think that's just hitting lightning in a bottle. I think a lot of times you need to show a lot more patience with this thing. I mean, when you look at it, I think we probably didn't give enough credit to the amount of talent that left Tucson this year, not just that went with Jed to Seattle, but the ones that left, because their careers, their college careers were over. Guys went to the NFL and whatnot. I think when you have a quarterback like Noah Fafita and a wide receiver like T-Mac, you're like, oh, we're good. But there's more than two guys on a football team. You know what I mean? You have to have more than that. And that's not like denigrating who's on the team. I just think I think there might have been some overinflated expectations based on how good those two were. Now, the coaching staff has not done great this year. I think probably based on, how they made the change early on. I doubt that Dino Beavers will be there again next year. I think there will be some, there'll definitely be some changes on that. I mean, there's definitely a drumbeat in Tucson from some of the fans. I don't know what percentage it is. Online can really warp your perception of anything. But the head coach changed. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think it should happen. I don't think that's the right path for the program. At some point you have to be realistic in all of this, but I was very happy for them to win on Friday. You could tell, you see the video in the locker room afterward, the water going all over the place, that the team was still excited by it. It wasn't just like, oh, great, we won. Now it's Houston. You should win Houston. Next week, you get Sonny, you're going up against Sonny Dykes, the old Arizona offensive coordinator from, years ago. But I think, I hope that they can get at least one more win. I don't know if they're going to get 2 wins to be able to be bowl eligible here, because they got ASU at TCU, and then they got ASU to close the season. But I would like to see them start to build more momentum as we head into the offseason.
Well, we know they're capable, right? I think that's fair. I think it's also fair that it's been a disappointing season, right? We have to be blunt about that. But I think it's also fair to say what Brent Brennan inherited was a talented team. And when he got there, it was all about also making sure his guys that were on the previous roster became his guys. And we're all in on that. And that, to me, in the era of head coaching changes, doesn't really get a lot of play. You're navigating a roster amid, true, I don't know what the best word is, but could be upheaval, could be stability. It's just uneasy, right? So Brent Brennan had to navigate that. To your point, we've seen notable coordinator changes in the latter part of the season in college football, most notably at Utah, just had one at Wisconsin, of course, at Nebraska. Theirs was early. Theirs was early on. So you just got to wonder, how the whole thing was in the locker room. And I think, to your point, what Brent Brennan has done, and I still stand by everything I've said about him, known him for a long time. I think he's as good of a cultural builder as there is in college football. I think that he's got such a pulse on this team and the buttons to push. And yes, it hasn't gone great, but they've also lost, 2 captains on defense for the season. They don't have anywhere near the competitive depth, and they didn't under Jed Fish either, right? They had their top guy, and then it was a drop-off. We've seen them get hit at the injury position, big time, especially on defense, and I think they've struggled finding a number 2 receiver. And every team's going to take away T-Mac. It's just a fact. And every quarterback, for Noah Fafita, I believe this to happen. Your second year as a starter, usually in college, I saw it at SC all the time, you really struggle. You really struggle because it's the first time dealing with all the preseason expectations. Sam Darnold dealt with it his final year at SC. He came in, took the job from our friend Max Brown, and away they went to win a Rose Bowl. And then it was a whole year of everything. Same thing for Noah Fafita, man. This is not an easy thing to navigate. And I think oftentimes because of the status and stature of players, we think they can navigate it with ease. That's not the case, especially when things aren't going well. Then you change your play caller. So I actually give Brent Brennan a lot of credit for holding this thing together. There's a world where T-Mac just dips, where a lot of players say, I'm shutting it down for the draft or I'm hitting the portal. We haven't seen any of that. In fact, they've been phenomenal when you've heard them communicate post-game and media availability. So I'm glad they got a win. All right, before we get to our guest in Trent Bray, they are facing, of course, Washington State this week. This is a big week. For Wazoo, you referenced it off the top. Playoff hopes no longer, but big-time bowl still there. Jim, can you just lay out, what is the bowl situation here for Washington State as we look at this game? And we know that for the Beavs, they've got to win out if they do want to get to the postseason as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at it. You still have the same Pac-12 bowl contracts, and oddly enough, for this year and next year, it's still including all the old Pac-12 teams, no matter where they're in the other conferences. Now you look at it, so that those top three bowls are the Alamo, the Holiday, and the Las Vegas Bowl. And right now, I mean, it's an almost certainty. I can't imagine a scenario where Oregon is not going to the playoff. So take them out of the mix. Then it's basically Colorado, Arizona State, Washington State that are kind of clearly ahead of all the other former Pac-12 teams in that mix. And there's a decent chance that either Colorado or Arizona State is one of the teams going to the playoffs too. So we'll see how that materializes. But in that realm, you're looking at either those three teams, Colorado, ASU, and Washington State, filling those three spots, or filling two of those spots because one of those Big 12 teams is going to the postseason. So Washington State has still a lot, even though now the college football playoff is no longer a realistic option. A quality bowl game against what would likely be a very quality team. Now, who knows, now that we're in this transfer portal era and everything else, of like which team will actually, we'll know what uniforms will show up to those bowl games, but you never know what actual teams show up to the bowl games because of transfers and everything else. But I mean, you have a chance for a very cool matchup come this offseason.
I love that. All right, so let's get to the very cool matchup. Oregon State, Washington State. We're going to break down this game all week long. Right now, though, we're going to talk to the head coach of Oregon State in his first year and navigating some challenging times, but definitely knows the only way through it is to work your way through it. So on behalf of our founding partner, 76, we bring you a conversation with the head coach of the Oregon State Beavers, Trent Bray. I love it. We don't get repeat guests very often, Coach. We have you coming back, Trent Bray, head coach at Oregon State. Coach, how are you navigating? Here we are sitting in November. You got a big game against the Cougs coming up this weekend, coming off a tough one. Yeah,
navigating's just, you're disappointed because of the outcomes the last couple of weeks. But the reality is you got another game to play that you got to go win. And so staying focused on the process and locking in the Washington State and what we got to do to beat Washington State.
I think so often, like, fans can think like, oh, coming off a tough loss, like, you got to stay focused. It can be hard. But I think for players, it's like, no, they want the next practice, the next game. I'm curious for you, this team extremely well. What have you noticed about the attention to detail for this team every single week coming back to work, preparing for the games?
The thing that's been great with this group and why it gives me great encouragement moving forward is you wouldn't know what our record is watching practice. They show up and they work, and then they're intentional about their work. There's no one hanging their head or feeling sorry for themselves. They go out there and work. And so that has made it much more enjoyable and easier to navigate through this time because of the way they show up.
I sometimes chuckle when I think about this. Players, can navigate challenging times and move through them. Like coaches, sometimes like we hang on to it, right? I coach my kids' flag team. Coach, we only won one game this year. And like every Sunday night, I'm laying with my wife and I'm like replaying the game in my head, right? Like I can't get over it. And they're 9-year-olds. How are you and how are you coaching the coaches to navigate this challenging stretch?
Yeah, it's just that we got to be able to move on as coaches because it is hard because you put a week of work in and game planning, and then if it doesn't turn out the way you want, it's frustrating. But we got to look at everything. Okay, what are we asking them to do? Is it too much? Are they good at the things we're asking them to do? And just keep always diving into how can we help these guys be successful?
I know you haven't coached as long as your father has yet, but you've been around the game since you were born. Have you ever been around a season where the injury bug hits a team the way that it has hit yours this season?
Not to this extent, but I've been a part of some teams where it's been unfortunate. But yeah, there's been a lot this year.
Yeah, and to that point, because I think it's not an excuse, but it is a reality, especially when your depth isn't maybe as deep as it's been in recent years, or like you may have hoped in year one. How have you seen young players rise up, or players that in August were like, okay, they'll have a role on special teams, but now they're counted on to play 50, 60 snaps in the game?
Yeah, I think it's in the long run, it's going to be a good thing. Like, even though it's tough right now, there's a lot of freshmen and just young guys that are getting their first meaningful minutes in college football for us this year. Even guys that transferred in here were freshmen when they left the school that they were at. So that in the long run is going to help us. There's no question. And we just got to continue to get them ready to play at a high level every week.
Is there somebody in a story that has stood out to you among that young group?
I don't know if there's been, like one exact guy because there's been so many. I look at guys like Isaiah Chisholm, who's getting his first starts this year as a redshirt freshman. Saladin Allah on offense at running back, who's really starting to come along and make some good plays for us. That's going to be a really good player in the future.
Yeah, you can definitely see them flash to a large degree. I think on one hand, like, yes, it's your first year as a head coach, but you've run a side of the team for a few years in advance of that as the defensive coordinator. What has been either the easiest or most enjoyable part of this transition, and what in year one has been the biggest challenge of sitting in that big corner office for you?
Yeah, the most enjoyable is the kind of interaction and ability to, have spread, whatever my beliefs and whatever through a whole team, right? The relationships I have with the whole team now, instead of just one side of the ball, and being able to help those guys on both sides of the ball. That's been the most enjoyable. The hardest part's been letting go of the X's and O's. Because that's been just what I've done for so long, and I enjoy that part of it so much. That's been the toughest part for me.
So how do you do it? Like, if we were into the headsets, like, is it just you just have to have that discipline and allow it to happen, or do you just kind of pick and choose? Because I say that, like, I can remember, I'm aging myself here, but I remember being at SC under Coach Carroll, and I learned a lot from Steve Sarkisian, and we'd be on the headsets all the time, and Pete to this day would say, yeah, I probably did too much, because he'd be, well, run this and try this and do that, and we'd be like, dude, like, come on. So I'm curious for you, like, how you've navigated that discipline to not get into the thing that you've always had success being around.
Yeah, I think it's picking your moments, and making sure what you say is constructive and not out of frustration. That's been lessons I've learned throughout the year. But also, in general, I just try to be the head coach that I'd want as a coordinator. And so if I think of it that way, you don't want someone meddling and in your ear all the time, because that's just going to take away from anything rather than add to it. So that's really been the focus for me.
That's cool. What kind of head coach would you have wanted?
Like, I've been fortunate enough to be able to coach for those guys. Coach Erickson, Mike Riley, Jonathan. When I got into being a coordinator, he gave me great suggestions, but let me do what he hired me to do. And so that was great for me, and that's who I want to be as a head coach as well.
Stealing that's awesome. We were together, it seems like many moons ago, in Las Vegas, and the title of, like, the preseason media event was Welcome to the Fight. It's been one for you guys. It is for your counterpart this weekend. What has it been like being, two teams in a league that is also expanding in real time throughout this season?
It's been interesting. You try to stay locked in and focused on the task at hand, but there is a lot of stuff going on. I will say it's getting better as far as there's a conference, teams are joining, there's a future, there's a path forward, which has been great, not only for the program and the guys in the program now, but in recruiting. The recruits know that there's a plan moving forward has helped a lot.
How is that? And I know you'll hit the road here in a matter of weeks and aggressively get after it here with the early signing day coming up. But I'm curious now, with the new look Pac-12, at least from my vantage point, I think it's going to be the strongest group of five conference, if you want to coin it that. Mm-hmm. But you get basically an automatic berth with whoever wins it into the now expanded playoff. How has that, if it has, opened up more living rooms per se, or more phone calls? And I'm curious what the receiving end of that has been like from recruits.
Yeah, it's been good. I think they see that as well. As there's a better path to get to that playoff, right, in the Pac-12 than probably has been in the past. And it's also becoming the only conference in the country where you can play regionally. where your family, if you're a California or West Coast kid, can actually watch you play live every Saturday and have that ability. So I think that makes it unique now because, every other conference, you're traveling across the country every other weekend.
Yeah, that's an incredible point, Coach. I'll leave it at that. This senior group that you guys have, this is the time they're going to run out. They're going to go out of that tunnel. Research Stadium is going to be rocking for the game this weekend. What has this group meant for you in your first year? I'd imagine these seniors are the first ones to give you a hug when you walked into that team room when you were named the head coach.
Yeah, it's been. It was so much appreciation for them, and they've been through a lot. They were here when we started to rebuild this the first time, and got it to the point where we were winning 10 games, 8 games last year, and then they're back in kind of a rebuild mode. So they've been through a lot and then handled a lot of adversity, which I think in the long run makes you a better person. But they've been great to work with. They're all about this place, and it's made my job easier.
Wow. Yeah, I think back to senior day like it was yesterday. I can still remember like getting a hug from my parents. I'm sure you could dig up that old photo from you back in the day as well. Be remiss if we didn't ask about the quarterback position. It's been one that's been challenging, hit with many injuries for you guys this season. Where do you anticipate? I know it's earlier in the week on game week, but where do you guys net out in advance of the game against the Cougs?
Yeah, we're hoping to have Ben Gulbranson back and him being ready to go. But we also got between Giovanni and Jabari, got to get them ready as well. And it'll kind of be where are we at? We'll know Tuesday. So we'll know where we're going to be at as far as health. And then we got to make a plan and move on. And again, goes back to whoever that quarterback is, what did they do well? And we got to tailor the game plan to what they do well.
Ben Gulbranson, what a journey he has been on. I mean, whoever is penning that book, or if he's looking for a co-author, have him call us here. Happy to help in that regard. Postseason is clearly a topic. Bowl eligibility. You referenced your team and how they're able to focus and be lasered in on the next day, the next opportunity, the next practice period at hand. How do you navigate the reality of what you need to do in the last 2 weeks to get to the postseason with your roster?
I think it's just that in order to get to 6, we got to win this one. And so you can't worry about anything else but getting this one. And then you move on from that after it's done.
I know Ted Robinson, our good friend, is going to be calling the game this weekend. If we had a mic on you and Jake Dickert in the pregame, what would you think that conversation is going to be like in the most unique of years, I'd imagine, hopefully ever in your coaching lives?
I'm not sure. That'd be an interesting conversation, I'm sure, because we both probably have strong opinions about what's going on and what's happened, and have some good insight. I'd be interested to just hear from his point of view everything that's gone on, because I know it's been crazy for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll talk to Ted and Molinari and the company, see if we can get some mics on you in advance of the game, man. I can't wait to watch it. As always, know how busy you are, but you've been so gracious with us, and I've loved our relationship over the course of time, man. Wishing you the best this weekend. Enjoy. I know you will. Senior day and the final game for players that mean so much to you and that program. Thanks for the time today, Coach.
I appreciate it.
It's the Afterglow. That was Trent Bray, Yogi Roth here, Jim Thornby there. Jim, what were your takeaways from the first-year head coach of Oregon State?
I mean, obviously he's dealing with a lot of adversity this year. I mean, he downplayed it as any coach would with the injuries. But I mean, if you really look at what this team has gone through, especially on the defensive line and the defensive backfield, and starting from spring ball all the way through fall camp, and then the season started off pretty good. Obviously they lost the Oregon game, but then the injuries really started to tack on, and just to even still be in the hunt for a bowl game right now, I think is impressive. Obviously, there's in no way, shape, or form is this the way they thought this was going to go or planned for this to go. But to his point, a lot of young guys are going to get a lot of experience this year that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So as they look to rebuild this program, that's going to come in huge.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let's not forget the fact of the situation that they are in. And let's not forget that Trent Bray held together as best as he could. Yes, some players did depart for other institutions, but the players that are there, at least from every player or coach or people I talked to, like, they love being there and being around that program. It's going to be and always has been a developmental program. So now when you look at next year, it's going to be another unique season. But the year after that, to me, is what these young players are building for. When these young freshmen that are getting some playing time this coming Saturday and past Saturdays are third-year players and juniors in that program in year one of the new look Pac-12, they're going to be in prime position to make a case to, of course, win that league and have a shot to go to the postseason, and that postseason not just be bowl eligibility, but be the playoff. And I think that's the long lens you want. For the Oregon State fans, you have the right guy leading the program. Nobody cares more about a program than those that have played there, those that have put on the uniform. I'm telling you, it is just a different thing, the pride that he and the staff has. So yeah, frustrating, crushed by injuries. And they don't have the competitive depth that some other teams have in major college football. They were hit hard by the portal. So now, okay, they couldn't survive the injury element. Now, how do they finish and make this a 2-game season? I think they got to clearly have a big one on Saturday. And then just keep pitching the opportunity. You can come play here and you can come win here and you can make a huge difference. Oregon State is a power team. It's a power school. They have the support. They have the resources. They have the NIL. They have all the things I believe that are necessary to be a powerhouse on the West Coast and be able to play a Boise every year and a Washington State every year and a San Diego State in the future every year to go to the playoff. I mean, that's a real thing. So I loved what he said about that element in recruiting, and just love the time for a head coach to take out their time during the week to spend time with us is awesome. I cannot wait to watch it on Saturday. Our crew will be on. It'll be Ryan. It'll be Ted. It'll be Nigel. And now, sounds like the coaches will be mic'd up in pregame. Let's go. Let's go. All right. There it is. We're out of here. I'm going to go.
You've just now committed them both. Way to go.
Yeah. Come on, guys. Just go with it. All right. Lots of love. I know you could be watching this on Pac-12 Insider as well if you've got a smart TV. So that is very cool. Check us out on YouTube. And, of course, thanks for all the love, giving you college football through the lens of the West Coast right here at yoption.com. Peace.